She keyed the handset at 0821 and she did not put it down for 9 hours. 43 Marines walked into Sangin that morning. 43 Marines came home because of what she did in that chair. 12 officers were in the same combat operations center. 12 officers heard the same gap on the same net. None of them moved. She did. She was 23 years old. She was 41 days in country. Her after-action report sat in a drawer for 3 years. Tonight, I'm taking it out. I want you to picture a radio. Not a phone. Not a headset. A radio. And /PRC 117F. Field Manpack, multiband. About 13 pounds with the battery. Olive drab paint, scratched down to the metal at the corners where it's been set down on concrete and gravel and the floors of helicopters too many times to count. There's a strap that goes over your shoulder. The strap is woven nylon. And on this particular radio, the strap is darker on the right side than the left because the operator who carried it sweated through the same shoulder for 8 months. There's a handset on a coiled cord. The handset has a push-to-talk button on the left side. And on this particular handset, the rubber over that button has a dark stain the color of dried coffee. It is not coffee. Nobody ever cleaned it off. It's still there. The radio is in a glass case at the Marine Corps Air Station Miramar Communications Museum. In a corner, most visitors walk past on their way to the F-4 Phantom display. The placard underneath the case has 11 words on it. None of those words is her name. Her name is Corporal Lena Park. Tacoma, Washington. Military Occupational Specialty 0621. Field Radio Operator. United States Marine Corps. October 14, 2010. Before I tell you what happened in those 9 hours, I have to tell you about Tacoma. Because if you don't understand Tacoma, you don't understand why a 23-year-old woman with no combat MOS and no rifle in her hand was the first person in that room to notice that 43 men had gone quiet. South Tacoma is not the part of the city you see on the postcards. The postcards are the waterfront and Mount Rainier and the gentrified blocks downtown. South Tacoma is auto body shops and Korean grocery stores and the long flat boulevard out to the Boeing plant on Marginal Way. The Park family lived in a yellow house on South 48th, 2 blocks from the elementary school, 3 blocks from the Lutheran church that runs the food bank. Lena's father left in 1993. She was 6 years old. I'm not going to tell you why he left, because the people who told me about him did not agree on the story, and I'm not in the business of guessing on a man who isn't here to defend himself. He left. He sent a check sometimes. He stopped sending checks in 1998. After that, he was a man who used to live in the house, and then he was a name on a Christmas card that came one year and didn't come the next, and then he was nothing. Lena's mother, Sangin Park, worked the swing shift at the Boeing plant assembling wiring harnesses for the 737. Then she came home, slept 4 hours, and worked the morning shift at a Korean restaurant on Pacific Avenue. She did this for 11 years. She is 63 now. Her hands are not the hands of a 63-year-old woman. Her hands are the hands of a woman who has been doing fine motor work for 40 years, and they shake a little now, and she does not complain about it. I met her once. She made me tea. She does not speak much English, even now. She did not need to. Lena was the older of 2 daughters. The younger sister, June, was 4 years behind her. Lena raised her. That is not a metaphor. Their mother was at one of 2 jobs from the time Lena was 8 years old, and Lena made the dinner and checked the homework and walked June to school and walked June home and did the laundry in the basement of the yellow house on South 48th. By the time she was 12, she could iron a school uniform. By the time she was 15, she could file her sister's financial aid paperwork. She was a quiet child. Her teachers wrote the same word on her report cards every year. Reliable, reliable, reliable. The school counselor at Lincoln High School, a woman named Mrs. Halvorson, told Lena in the spring of 2004 that she should think about Tacoma Community College. Maybe nursing. Maybe medical billing. Mrs. Halvorson meant well. Mrs. Halvorsen had looked at Lena Park's family income and Lena Park's quiet posture in the back of the classroom and Lena Park's last name, and she had drawn a line on a map. The line did not go very far. There was an uncle, Sumin's older brother. His name was Jean Ho. He had come to the United States in 1976, and he had enlisted in the United States Air Force in 1978, and he had served 22 years as a communications technician at bases I'm not going to name because he asked me not to. He retired in 2000 and was living in a small house in Lakewood, 15 minutes from his sister. He was the closest thing Lena had to a father after 1993. In December of 2008, Lena Park sat in her Uncle Jean Ho's kitchen, and she told him she had been to see a Marine Corps recruiter. She did not ask his permission. She told him. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he asked her one question. He asked her if she could sit still in a chair for 9 hours. She thought he was joking. He was not joking. She told him yes. He told her then she would do fine. She left for Paris Island in March of 2009. She graduated boot camp on June 5th. Marine combat training at Camp Geiger followed. Then she reported to 29 Palms, California, for MOS school, the Marine Corps Communication Electronics School. 0621. Field Radio Operator. The course is 14 weeks. You learn to operate, maintain, and troubleshoot tactical radio equipment from squad-level man-portable systems up through retransmission sites. You learn antenna theory. You learn frequency planning. You learn voice procedure until it stops sounding like a foreign language and starts sounding like the only language. You learn cryptographic loading procedures. You learn how to swap a battery in the dark. You learn how to fix a broken handset cord with electrical tape and a paperclip and the kind of stubbornness that does not come out of a textbook. Lena Park graduated her MOS course on the high end of her class. Not the top. She was not flashy, but in the upper third, which for a quiet kid from South Tacoma was a small kind of revolution. Her first duty station was Camp Pendleton, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. 3-5. Dark Horse. She arrived in February 2010. She was assigned to the battalion communications section. She unpacked her sea bag in the female barracks. She wrote a letter to her mother that night. The letter is short. I have a copy of it. She wrote it in Korean. The English translation reads, I made it. The food is bad. I miss your tea. Don't worry. They are going to send us somewhere soon. I will write again. 3-5 deployed to Sangin District, Helmand Province, Afghanistan, on the 3rd of September 2010. They relieved a British unit, 40 Commando, Royal Marines, who had taken serious casualties over the previous summer. Sangin in 2010 was the worst piece of ground in Afghanistan. I'll say that plainly. 3-5 would lose 25 Marines killed in action and more than 200 wounded over a 7-month tour. The exchange rate in Sangin in the fall of 2010 was the worst exchange rate any Marine battalion had paid since Vietnam. That's not opinion. That's the math. Corporal Park arrived at Forward Operating Base Jackson on the 3rd of September. She had a cot, a wall locker, a flak vest she had not yet broken in, and a duty roster that put her on shift in the Combat Operations Center 6 days out of 7, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. The COC at Jackson was a plywood and canvas structure on the east side of the FOB. There was a battle map on one wall. There was a row of radios along another wall. There were folding tables. There was a coffee pot that ran 24 hours a day and produced something that was technically coffee. There was a chief radio operator, a staff sergeant from Detroit named Marcus Riggins, who had been on his 4th deployment and who had a way of looking at a new arrival that told you exactly how much patience he had budgeted for you, which was usually a small amount. For 41 days, Corporal Park did her job. She copied traffic. She logged net checks. She updated frequencies on the daily SOI. She handed a handset to an officer when an officer needed one. She drank the coffee that was not coffee. She slept 4 hours at a time on a cot that was 3 inches too short for her. She wrote 2 letters home. She received one from her sister. She did not cry on shift. She cried twice off shift. Once when a sergeant she did not know personally was killed by an IED on a patrol she had logged out that morning. And once when she got a care package from her mother that contained a small jar of homemade kimchi that had broken open in transit and ruined the rest of the contents. She cleaned up the kimchi alone in the female head at 0330, and she did not tell anyone about it. 41 days. That's the context. That's what she walked in with on the morning of October 14th. I want to talk about what a normal patrol net sounds like. Because if you have never sat in a combat operations center, you don't know. A patrol net is a frequency. It's a channel. There are units on it. There are call signs. There are scheduled check-ins. A foot patrol of a rifle squad in Sangin in 2010 was supposed to make a position report every 15 minutes when actively moving and every 30 minutes when static. The reports were short. Call sign. Position grid. Status. Out. The rhythm of a patrol net on a normal day in Sangin was the rhythm of a clock. You did not consciously hear it. It was the wallpaper of the room. But the moment it stopped, the moment a clock stops in a house you have lived in for 20 years, you feel it before you hear it. On the morning of October 14th, 2010, the patrol that went silent was call sign Bravo 21. Bravo 21 was 1st Platoon, Bravo Company, 3-5. 43 Marines, with attachments. They had departed patrol base fires at 0643, moving south-southwest along a route designated Phase Line Indianapolis, with the mission of clearing a series of compounds in a village that I'm not going to name, because the village is still there and the people in it have suffered enough without me putting their grid coordinates in a video. The patrol leader was a first lieutenant named Daniel Hayes, 26 years old, on his second deployment. The patrol was scheduled to be out for approximately 6 hours. The first scheduled check-in was at 0800. Bravo 21 did not call. This in itself was not unusual. Patrols miss check-ins. Terrain blocks signal. Operators get distracted. The COC procedure is to wait one cycle, 15 minutes, and then attempt to raise the patrol. The duty radio operator at 0800 was Corporal Lena Park. She made a note in the log. She did not panic. She waited. The second scheduled check-in was at 0815. Bravo 21 did not call. Park keyed the handset. She transmitted 3 times in standard voice procedure. Bravo 21, Bravo 21. This is Dark Horse Main, radio check, over. She got nothing. Not a broken transmission. Not static keying. Nothing. The frequency was open, and there was no one on the other end of it. I want you to understand what that means. An open frequency with no transmission is not the same as a dead frequency. A dead frequency is a hardware problem. An open frequency with no transmission is 43 men with a working radio who are not pressing the button. There are 3 reasons that happens. 1. They have moved into terrain that blocks their signal, in which case they will pop up again on the next high point. 2. Their radio has been damaged or their operator is incapacitated, in which case a different Marine on a different radio will eventually call in. 3. The situation is bad enough that no one has a free hand for a handset. At 0821, Corporal Lena Park stood up from her chair. She walked the 6 steps to the battle map on the wall. She looked at the route. She looked at the topography. She looked at the time. She walked back to her chair. She sat down. She looked across the COC at Staff Sergeant Riggins, who was on the other side of the room reading a sitrep from 2nd Platoon. She did not call out. She did not raise her voice. She keyed the handset on the secondary frequency, the alternate that every patrol carries as backup, and she transmitted. Bravo 21, Bravo 21. This is Dark Horse Main on alternate. Radio check, over. Nothing. She tried it twice more. Nothing. She switched to the company net. Bravo 6. This is Dark Horse Main, requesting status of Bravo 21, over. Bravo 6 was the Bravo Company commander. He came back almost immediately. Dark Horse Main. This is Bravo 6. Last known position Bravo 21 was Phase Line Indianapolis at 0752, en route to Objective Charlie. Confirm last contact. Park keyed back. Bravo 6. This is Dark Horse, Maine. Last contact 0752. Missed 2 scheduled check-ins. No response on primary or alternate. Over. There was a pause on the company net. About 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time on a tactical radio. Then Bravo 6 came back. Roger, Dark Horse, Maine, stand by. That was the moment. That was 0823. 12 officers in the Combat Operations Center had been in earshot of every transmission Corporal Park had made in the previous 2 minutes. 12 officers had heard the same gap on the same net. None of them had moved. None of them had keyed a handset. None of them had walked to the map. The duty officer, a captain whose name I'm going to leave out of this for reasons I'll explain later, was on the secure phone with the regimental intelligence section, talking about something that did not matter as much as Bravo 2-1. The battalion operations officer, a major, was in the latrine. The fire support officer was asleep on a cot in the back. The other officers were doing the things officers do in a COC at 0820 in the morning, which is mostly drink coffee and read traffic and assume that the system is going to handle itself. Corporal Lena Park did not assume that. She did not know yet, at 0823, what had happened to Bravo 2-1. She would not know for another 9 hours. But she knew enough at 0823 to put her hand on the handset and not take it off. And she did not take it off. What had happened was this. Bravo 2-1 had walked into a complex ambush at 0758, 6 minutes after the last check-in. The lead element triggered an IED. The blast killed 2 Marines instantly and wounded 6. The remainder of the patrol came under fire from at least 3 positions on the high ground to their west and north. The platoon radio operator, a lance corporal named Tyler Beckman, had been the second man behind the point. He had been hit in the right thigh by an AK round in the opening volley. The round had clipped the femoral artery, not a clean transection, a partial, which is in some ways worse, because a clean transection is something a tourniquet can fix in 15 seconds, and a partial is something that bleeds and bleeds and bleeds. Beckman had crawled with his radio to a low wall on the east side of the path. He had keyed his handset once. He had said 3 words. The 3 words were contact, contact, contact. And then his radio had gone silent, because the antenna had been sheared off by a piece of shrapnel he had not seen, and he had not realized his radio was dead, and he had been trying to raise the COC for 19 minutes on a transmitter that was not transmitting. Lieutenant Hayes was forward of the wall, returning fire with his M4, and he did not know that the radio operator was hit, and he did not know that his only link to the COC had been silent for 19 minutes, because he was a little busy. Corporal Park did not know any of that yet. She knew the silence. She worked from the silence backwards. At 0825, she did 3 things in the space of 40 seconds. First, she keyed the medical evacuation frequency, and she put dust off on standby, not requesting a launch, just informing the regimental medevac section that there was a patrol overdue and they should warm up. Second, she keyed the quick reaction force net, and she informed the QRF, which was a platoon from Charlie Company at patrol base fires, that they should stand to. Third, she got out of her chair, she walked across the COC to Staff Sergeant Riggins, and she said 1 sentence to him, very quietly. The sentence was, Staff Sergeant, Bravo 2-1 has been off the net for 23 minutes, and I think they're in contact. Riggins looked at her for about 2 seconds. Then he stood up, and he went to find the duty officer. The duty officer was the captain on the secure phone. Riggins put a hand over the secure phone, and he said, very calmly, hang up. The captain hung up. By 0830, the COC was awake. I want to slow down here, because what happened between 0830 and 1742 on October 14th is the part that doesn't fit on a citation. A citation reads like a movie. The truth is more like a long shift in an emergency room. There are decisions, but most of them are small. There are moments of high drama, but most of the work is grinding and procedural and exhausting. The work was that for 9 hours, Corporal Lena Park was the person on the radio. She did not get up. She did not eat. She drank water that someone put next to her elbow at some point. She went to the latrine once, at approximately 1400, while a corporal from the night shift covered her station for 90 seconds. She did not stop talking, and she did not stop listening, and she did the kind of work that nobody trains you for completely, because you cannot train somebody for 9 hours of sustained attention. You can only train them for the first hour, and then you find out who they are. At 0834, she made first contact. Not with Beckman. Beckman's radio was dead and would stay dead. She made contact with the platoon sergeant, a sergeant first class named Eduardo Medina, who had taken his platoon commander's PRC-117 off Hayes' back when Hayes was busy controlling the firefight, and who came up on the alternate frequency at 0834 with a transmission that I am going to read to you exactly as it is logged. The log entry reads, 0834. Bravo 21 Sierra to Dark Horse, main on alternate. Quote, Dark Horse, Bravo 2 Sierra, we are in heavy contact. 2KI, 6WI, urgent surgical, request dust-off and QRF. Grid follows, break. End quote. Park acknowledged. She copied the grid. She passed it to Medevac. She passed it to the QRF. She acknowledged the casualty count. She did not say anything to Medina that was not in voice procedure. She did not say I'm sorry or hold on or we've got you. She said Roger. She said understood. She said grid copied. She said dust off inbound your location, ETA 15 mics. She said QRF moving, ETA 25 mics. She said maintain this frequency. I have you. That last sentence is not voice procedure. That last sentence is the only personal thing she said on the radio in 9 hours. I have you. 3 words. She said it once, and she said it at 0834, and Sergeant Medina told me about it 9 years later sitting at a kitchen table in El Paso. He said he had been in the Army and the Marine Corps for 19 years at that point, and he had heard 1,000 voices on 1,000 radios, and he knew within 3 transmissions whether the operator on the other end was going to hold up or not. He said when she said I have you, he stopped worrying about the radio. He had a lot of other things to worry about, but he stopped worrying about the radio. He told his lieutenant that the rear was solid. He told his Marines to focus on the fight in front of them. He said the rear was solid because of a 23-year-old corporal he had never met, whose voice he would not have recognized at a barbecue, who was sitting in a plywood building on a base he had walked out of that morning, and he trusted her completely, on the basis of 3 words. That is what a field radio operator does on a good day. The medevac bird launched out of Camp Bastion at 0841. 2 CH-47 Chinooks, escort by 2 AH-64 Apaches. Park stayed on the medevac frequency and the patrol frequency simultaneously, switching between handsets, one at each ear, talking and listening on both. She was running 2 conversations, one with the patrol on the ground and one with the air mission commander, and she was correlating between them in real time. The grid Medina had given her was approximate. Patrols in contact give approximate grids because they don't have time to plot precisely, and the air mission commander needed precise. So Park talked Medina through marking. He had a smoke grenade, but the wind was wrong and the smoke would drift. She had him pop the smoke at a specific waypoint 30 meters east of his actual position so the drift would put it over the casualty collection point. She did this calculation in her head, with a topographic map in front of her, in approximately 90 seconds. The bird put down at 0858. 6 wounded loaded. Liftoff at 0904. Beckman was the second one on. He was unconscious by then. He had lost approximately 2.5 liters of blood. He was alive when they got him on the bird because the corpsman attached to Bravo 2-1, a petty officer 3rd class named Mario Delacroix, had finally found Beckman behind the wall at 0840, had gotten a tourniquet high on the right thigh, had stuck him with a 16 gauge in the left antecubital, had run a bag of Hextend wide open, and had kept him alive on the floor of a Sangin compound for 18 minutes. The patrol was still in contact. The QRF was still inbound. The fight was not over. I want to tell you about the Lance Corporal now. Tyler Beckman, 20 years old, from a small town in eastern Pennsylvania called Catawissa. He survived. That's important. I'm going to say that now so you don't have to wonder for the next 40 minutes. He survived. He spent 8 months at Walter Reed. He did not lose the leg, although for the first 3 weeks they were not sure. He has a permanent limp. He works at his uncle's auto parts store in Catawissa. He has 2 children. He is fine, in the ways that the word fine can be used about a man who has lain bleeding behind a wall in Helmand province and listened to a radio that was not working. I have to back up here because the part about Beckman and the radio matters. After the medevac lifted at 0904, the patrol consolidated on a small compound about 100 meters east of the contact point. They had 2 KIA and 4 remaining wounded who were stable but needed evacuation. They were still receiving sporadic fire. The QRF was 20 minutes out. Lieutenant Hayes did the thing a good platoon commander does, which is he started reorganizing his element for movement. In the process, somebody, and to this day nobody is exactly sure who, although Medina thinks it was a Lance Corporal named Webb, found a second radio in the patrol's gear. It was Beckman's spare, a PRC-153, which is a smaller radio, a handheld. It had been in Beckman's assault pack. The pack had been blown off him in the initial blast and recovered when they consolidated. The radio still worked. Webb turned it on. He keyed up on the patrol frequency, and he said the words, "Dark Horse Main. This is Bravo 2-1 actual frequency. Can you read me?" And Park, in the COC, on a third handset she had now grabbed from the equipment rack, said, "I have you. Bravo 2-1. Send your traffic." There was nothing dramatic about it, but it meant that the patrol now had 2 working radios, and Park now had 2 voices on the ground. Medina on the alternate, Webb on the primary. She stayed on both for the next 6 hours. The QRF arrived at 0922. They linked up with Bravo 2-1. They began movement back toward patrol base fires. The fight was not finished. The compounds the patrol was moving through had been prepared with secondary positions, and the enemy continued to engage from displaced positions for the next 4 hours. There were 2 more wounded during the movement back. Park coordinated a second medevac at 11:47. There was a question at one point about whether to call in close air support. There was a section of F-18s on station, and the question went up the chain to the battalion commander, who ultimately said yes, and Park ran the 9-line CAS request to the airborne FAC, who was a Marine captain in a back seat of a Hornet, and she did it cleanly. And the strike went in at 12:14 on a compound the patrol had been receiving fire from for 40 minutes, and after the strike the fire stopped. There is a moment around 1400 I want to tell you about, because it's the moment the people who were there talk about when they talk about that day. By 1400, the patrol was moving through relatively secure ground, a kilometer from patrol base fires. The fight, for practical purposes, was over. But Beckman, the Lance Corporal who had been the first wounded, the one who had been on the bird at 0904, had been at Bastion's surgical hospital for almost 5 hours by then, and someone at Bastion had figured out that the patrol's radio operator had lost a lot of blood and had been bleeding out behind a wall, and someone had asked who the COC operator at Jackson had been who had run the call. They got Park's name. They asked her, through the chaplain at Bastion, who relayed through the chaplain at Jackson, if she would talk to Beckman for 2 minutes. Beckman was conscious. Beckman was asking for the woman on the radio. There is no procedure for this. There is no field manual entry for this. The Bastion chaplain rigged a phone patch through the regimental switchboard to a handset in the surgical recovery bay. Park took the call on a phone, not a radio, sitting in her chair in the COC, while Riggins stood next to her and held her other handset for the patrol net. Beckman could barely talk. He was on a lot of morphine. He said, "Are you the one who was on the radio?" She said yes. He said, "I couldn't get through." She said, "I know." He said, "I tried for a long time." She said, "I know you did." He said, "What's your name?" She said, "Corporal Park." He said, "Thank you, Corporal Park." She said, "Lance Corporal, You were never alone on that wall. I had you." He started crying. She did not. The whole call lasted 47 seconds. Then she gave the phone back to the chaplain, and she keyed the handset Riggins was holding, and she said, "Bravo 2-1 Sierra. This is Dark Horse, Maine. Status check. Over." And Medina came back, and the work went on. "I had you." She said it twice that day, on 2 different circuits, to 2 different Marines, 6 hours apart, and both of them are alive. The patrol returned to patrol base fires at 15:53. The last wounded man was evacuated at 16:21. The last firefight related to that morning's action ended at approximately 16:40 when a small element of Bravo Company cleared a compound the patrol had bypassed and found 2 enemy fighters waiting in it, which was its own brief, sharp engagement. No friendly casualties. Park stayed on the radios until 17:42, when the battalion operations officer, the major, the one who had been in the latrine at 0823, came over to her station and put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Corporal, I've got it. You can stand down." She stood up. She was stiff. Her right hand had a cramp in it from holding the handset. She walked out of the COC. She walked across the FOB in the dusk. She walked to her hooch. She sat down on her cot. She did not take off her boots. She lay back. She slept 14 hours. When she woke up, the next day's shift had already started without her, because Riggins had told the duty roster to leave her alone. Nobody said anything to her about the day. That's the part one keep coming back to. Nobody said anything to her. Not the captain who had been on the secure phone. Not the major who had been in the latrine. Not the battalion commander, who knew, because everyone in the COC knew. The Marines of Bravo 2-1, the ones who had walked back, did not know yet who had been on the radio. They had heard a voice on a handset for 9 hours. They did not have a face. They did not have a name. Riggins, the staff sergeant from Detroit, walked past her in the chow hall the next morning and put a hand on her shoulder for about 2 seconds. That is what was said about it in the immediate aftermath by the Marine Corps. 1 hand on a shoulder. 2 seconds. She did her shift the day after that, and the day after that, and every day for the next 5 months until the battalion redeployed back to Camp Pendleton in March of 2011. Now I have to tell you about the drawer. A communications after-action report on a day like October 14th is a routine document. It's written by the senior radio operator on duty, in this case, by Riggins, with input from Park, and it's filed up the chain. It documents call signs, frequencies, transmissions, response times, and any communication failures or innovations relevant to future operations. Riggins wrote his AAR. It was 4 pages long. It named Corporal Park 19 times. It quoted 3 of her transmissions verbatim, including the "I have you" transmission to Sergeant Medina at 0834. It recommended her for a Silver Star. He attached supporting statements from Medina, from Hayes, from Webb, from Delacroix the corpsman, and from the air mission commander of the medevac flight. The package went up to battalion in late October 2010. It disappeared. I'm not being dramatic. It physically disappeared. Battalion logged receipt. Battalion forwarded it to Regiment in November. Regiment had no record of receiving it. Riggins, in December, when he had not heard anything, called Regiment from Jackson. Regiment told him to refile. He refiled in January. The refiled package was logged at Regiment in February 2011. It was forwarded to Division. Division had no record of receiving it. The battalion redeployed in March. Riggins was a staff sergeant on his 4th tour, and he had 1,000 things to track when a battalion comes home, and the AR went to the back of his list, and the back of his list got long, and Park got promoted to sergeant in August 2011 and was reassigned to a different unit, and the paperwork that should have moved with her did not move with her. By the end of 2011, the package was somewhere in a system, but nobody in the system was looking for it. It sat 19 months in a drawer, or in a folder, or in a digital folder in a server in Quantico. The 2 officers who had originally signed it from Regiment up to Division, And I'm going to say their names now because they signed a document and then did not follow up on the document. And a signature is a thing a man owns, were Lieutenant Colonel Bradford Kane and Major Stephen Vossler. I'm not saying they sabotaged it. I am not saying they were malicious. I am saying that they signed a recommendation for a Silver Star for a 23-year-old female corporal in a non-combat MOS, and they did not pick up a phone for 19 months to ask whether anyone had acted on it. That is what I am saying. In April 2013, a lieutenant colonel named Christopher Atkins, who was the commander of a different battalion in a different regiment, was reviewing communications failures across Marine Corps operations in Helmand province from 2010 through 2012. He was doing this for a separate study that had nothing to do with Park. He was looking at an aggregate dataset of patrols in contact and the average time to first medevac for those patrols. October 14, 2010, showed up in his data as an outlier. A patrol that had gone 23 minutes without contact had a time to medevac of 17 minutes from first re-establishment of comms. The 17 minutes was the third fastest in his entire dataset. He pulled the file. He read Riggins' AAR. He spent 6 weeks finding everyone Riggins had quoted and verifying every claim. Then he started the paperwork. It took him 18 more months. He had to refile from scratch because the original recommendation had aged out of the standard processing window. He had to track down Park, who by then was a sergeant at the Marine Corps Communication Electronics School at 29 Palms, the same school she had graduated from in 2009, now teaching the same MOS, 0621, to new Marines. He had to get statements from Medina, from Hayes, from Webb, from Delacroix, all over again, because the original statements had aged out too. He had to fight a non-trivial bureaucratic battle with the awards branch over the question of why a recommendation for a Silver Star for a Marine in a non-combat MOS was being pushed by an officer from a different battalion. And the answer to that question, which Atkins gave in a memo I have read, was the only good answer, because the officers from her own battalion had failed to do it. The Silver Star was approved on January 9, 2014. There was no ceremony. The Marine Corps did not hold a formation at 29 Palms. The battalion that Park had served in had long since rotated through 2 more deployments and had a different command. The regiment had a different commander. Lieutenant Colonel Atkins was, by then, a full colonel at a desk in the Pentagon, and he could not travel to 29 Palms to pin a medal on a Marine he had never met. The medal was sent by United States Postal Service Priority Mail to the Marine Corps Communication Electronics School. It was held at the school's awards office for 2 weeks while administrators tried to figure out what to do with it. Eventually, a captain at the school, a captain who did not know the story, who had never deployed to Sangin, who had no connection to 3-5, opened the package, took out the Silver Star, took out the citation, called Sergeant Park into his office, read the citation aloud, handed her the medal, shook her hand, and said, "Congratulations, Sergeant." The whole event took 11 minutes. There was no formation. There was no photographer. There was no family. Her mother did not know it had happened until Park called her 3 days later, in Korean, on a Sunday afternoon, and said, "Mom, I got an award." And her mother said, "What kind?" And Park said, "A Silver Star." And her mother, who had worked the swing shift at the Boeing plant for 11 years and who had not asked her older daughter for anything since she had enlisted, said, "What does that mean?" And Park said, "It means I did my job." And her mother said, "Then I am not surprised," and they did not talk about it again. There is a third thing I have to tell you, because if I leave it out, the story is not complete. 2 months after the medal arrived, Park received a letter at the school. The letter was handwritten. It was 3 pages long. It was from a man named Christopher Atkins, who had retired the week before, and who had decided that since he was no longer in uniform, he could finally write the letter he had been wanting to write for a year. The letter is private, and I am not going to read it on this channel. But I am going to tell you that the last paragraph of the letter contains a sentence that reads as follows: "Sergeant Park, I do not know you. I have never met you. I read a 4-page document in a folder in 2013, and I decided that I would not retire from the Marine Corps until I had finished what someone else should have finished in 2010. I am writing you tonight because I am retired and the work is done, and I wanted you to know that someone, somewhere, did not forget. Respectfully, Christopher Atkins. I have a copy of that letter because Sergeant Park gave it to me. She gave it to me through her uncle Gene Ho, through the chaplain at 29 Palms, through 3 intermediaries, after she had told me she would not speak to me on camera and would not let me use her name, and then had thought about it for 4 months and had changed her mind on one point only, which was that I could read the letter. The rest of what she has told me, she has told me on the condition that I hold it for her. I am holding it. There is a Marine Corps corpsman I knew once, in Fallujah, in 2004. His name was Neil Decker, Petty Officer 3rd Class, United States Navy, attached to the 2nd Battalion of the 1st Marines. He patched 17 Marines in a 4-day period during the November fight. 2 of those Marines lived. The other 15 did not. He did everything right. He did everything any corpsman has ever done. He retired in 2007 as a Petty Officer 2nd Class, after 13 years of service, with a Navy Commendation Medal and no V device, because the paperwork for the V got lost between his battalion and his regiment, and nobody picked up a phone for a long time. He works at a Lowe's in Jacksonville, North Carolina, now. He is fine. He does not need a medal. But the medal was earned, and the medal is in a drawer somewhere, and the drawer is closed. Same drawer, different war. The radio is at MCOS Miramar now. I told you that at the beginning. I want to tell you now what is on the placard. The placard says, /PRC, 117F, Field Manpack Radio, in service U.S. Marine Corps 1998 to 2018, used in operations Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. That's it. There is no name. There is no date. There is no story. The handset is the original. The stain on the keypad is still there. Sergeant Park visits the museum once a year, on the 14th of October. She does not tell anyone she's coming. She buys a regular admission ticket. She walks to the case. She looks at the radio for about 2 minutes. Then she leaves. The docents do not know who she is. She prefers it that way. I told you at the start that I tried to interview her. I did. I wrote her a letter through the chaplain at 29 Palms in March of 2022. I told her what I was working on. I told her I would honor any conditions she set. She wrote back, through the same chaplain, in May. She told me she did not think the story was hers to tell. She thought it belonged to the 43. She thought it belonged to Beckman, who survived. She thought it belonged to the 2 who did not. She thought it belonged to Riggins, and to Medina, and to Atkins, and to her mother, and to her sister June, and to her uncle Gene Ho, and to a corpsman from Fallujah she had never met whose story I had once told her about over a dropped phone line. She did not think it belonged to her. I am telling it anyway. Sergeant, if you are watching, I am sorry. Some stories don't get to stay in a drawer. She is still on active duty. She made Staff Sergeant in 2017. She made Gunnery Sergeant last year. She is the senior enlisted instructor in the Field Radio Operator course at 29 Palms. Her students do not know her story. She does not tell them. What she tells them is something her uncle Gene Ho asked her in a kitchen in Lakewood, Washington, in December of 2008. She asks every new class on the first day of instruction. She asks them this: can you sit still in a chair for 9 hours? They laugh. They think it's a joke. It is not a joke. They will find out. Her name is Gunnery Sergeant Lena Park. Tacoma, Washington. Military Occupational Specialty 0621. Field Radio Operator. United States Marine Corps. 43 Marines. 9 hours. 1 drawer. 1 letter. 1 radio in a glass case in a museum in San Diego with a stain on the handset that nobody ever cleaned off. Tell someone.